Parshas Tzav begins with two mitzvahs regarding the ashes that are left over on the Mizbeach. The Mizbeach had different fires, different arrangements of fire on it for the different sacrifices and for the different uses in the Beis HaMikdash for fire. So there were a lot of ashes left over on the Mizbeach, and there was two different services, two different avodas in the Beis HaMikdash and in the Mishkan of what to do with those ashes. The first one was called Trumas Hadeshen, which was a daily service. The Kohen would go up to the Mizbeach, take a shovel full of ashes, take it down the ramp, and next to the ramp, put it on the floor in the Beis HaMikdash. And according to many opinions, miraculously, these ashes would be absorbed into the floor. And the second avodah was called Haitzas Hadeshen, which was every so often, not every day, but when the heap of ashes left on the Mizbeach got too big, some Kohen would take all of the ashes out of the Beis HaMikdash, outside of Har HaBayis, to a pure place, and over there let the ashes scatter, and thereby clean the space on top of the Mizbeach. Now, the obvious question is on the first of these two avodas. Clearing space from the ashes, we have to do, that's a necessity every so often. But what's the point of just taking one spoonful of ashes and putting it onto the right there next to the Mizbeach, and it miraculously gets absorbed into the floor? You're not even clearing space. You're just doing something seemingly very ceremonious. And if so, what is the ceremony? What spiritually does this represent? So the Alter Rebbe explains the difference between these two avodas, the Trumas Hadeshen and the Haramas Hadeshen, in a fascinating explanation, which goes as follows. The ashes are left over from what was set on fire, and this represents in life when our souls catch fire. We're very inspired. Yom Tov comes, a Yom Pagra comes, we got lit up by a good Farbrengen. And oftentimes this comes with a big downer the next day. Or I go to a wedding and I was so happy by the wedding, I go land back at home in my real life and all of a sudden I feel a void and I just feel a gap. And I feel ashes that seemingly are left over from a fire. I was just on fire, I was just happy. I felt my soul, I felt spiritually elevated, and now somehow that causes a drastic feeling every so often of inadequacy, of downness or depression the next day. The day after Simchas Torah for many, or the night after Simchas Torah is a tough day. The night after the Mashiach Suda, on Pesach. So why is this? And the answer is, just like on physical fire, the fire consumes and elevates most of the fuel, and just the most coarse parts remain at the bottom. So too, when we get lit up in a spiritual experience, then what's left, what didn't get elevated, feels much more dry and lands much harder. And Torah tells us how to deal with those downs. Torah tells us how to deal with what happens the next day after Yom Tov. What happens after you get home from the wedding? What happens after you've been in your elevated space and you seem to fall so much further down? There's two things you need to do with these ashes, because there's two types of ashes. The first type of ashes is a holy ashes. Some of these ashes need to be embraced. You know why you feel down? Because the spiritual elevation made a bubble burst. You're starting to realize that certain things that you do are not okay, or you need to integrate a bit more of this spirituality into the rest of your life. So those type of ashes, those feelings of down and inadequacy, you could celebrate. Take a spoon, leave it over there next to the Mizbeach, which is a place of getting close to Hashem, and that is a holy down. It's a down that doesn't paralyze you. That's a down that motivates you to get greater. You feel down about the situation you find yourself in, and now you could place yourself into a different situation. But then there's sometimes just a big heap of ashes that just seem paralyzing. Makes me sleep for 3 days after I had the spirit of elevation. Or after seeing other people that get so inspired on a Purim, on a Simchas Torah, that just makes me feel so depressed. That's what we call depression. And such ashes need to be taken. We need to get rid of those ashes. And that's what the Alter Rebbe says is a Haitzas Hadeshen. Trumas Hadeshen, which literally means elevating the ashes, is the first type of ashes. The ashes that don't paralyze me, they motivate me to make a change. Those aren't bad. You could embrace them, face them, and utilize that as a catalyst for growth. But then the ashes, that big heap that just seems to sit on me and tell me about myself that I am worthless, those we need to take out michutz lamachana and let them scatter. And if I may add, I think generationally, we see these days how you have we have so much, all negativity in the frum world, in people's family lives, in yeshiva systems, and all issues have come to the forefront, and people talk about them cynically, not so cynically, what needs fixing. And this doesn't mean that these problems never existed before, but maybe it means that we right now are caught in the fire of Geula, and when we're caught in the fire of Geula, we become much less tolerant. There are ashes that remain, and that means that these things that could have existed and needed addressing for years, but they weren't brought to the forefront. Nowadays, when the fire of Geula is lit up, now we see these ashes brought to the forefront, and that's not a bad thing. We could do Trumas Hadeshin with these ashes, and we could actually make a change. However, we can't become paralyzed by these ashes. Those type of ashes, if I look around and see the generations, challenges, and problems, and that just makes me cynical and start losing hope, that needs Haitza'as Hadeshin. The Deshin that I look for, the Deshin that I use to make a change, that should be celebrated and is holy. Have a great Shabbos.